MAP dashboard talk on housing vulnerability and manufactured housing. We're going to have 3 different perspectives today, 3 different guest speakers to talk about Tucson housing. They include Robert Hibbert and Laura McCain from the University of Arizona, Liz Morales, the Director of Housing and Community Development at the City of Tucson, and Jeremy Sharp, the Managing Director at Rancho Cerrita. Before we get started, I want to go through a little bit of the details from today's talk. All of our MAP talks are recorded. We publish them on the MAP dashboard website. We should have this one up by late morning tomorrow. I'll send all of you an email, every registrant an email with the link to the MAP talk in case you'd like to share it with your colleagues. And also a link in case you haven't registered for the MAP newsletter. It's a great way to stay up to date on events like today. Upcoming articles, data releases on the MAP dashboard. I'll send you that link in that email tomorrow, and you can sign up for our newsletter there or share the recording to today's MAP talk. We'll be in conference mode, meaning everyone will be muted except the presenter, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end. At the bottom of your screen, you can find a Zoom Q&A. We ask that you ask your questions there. I'll be checking them throughout the presentations. And as will George, you can email George Hammond, the Director of the Economic and Business Research Center here at ghammond@arizona.edu, if you prefer to use email instead of the Zoom Q&A. And we'll be checking those questions throughout, and we'll, at the very end, we'll leave about 20 minutes for question and answers for all of our presenters. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the MAP dashboard sustaining sponsors. They include Tucson Electric Power, the Thomas R. Brown Family Foundations, and the Freeport McMoran Foundations. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank our partners, the Community Foundation for Southern Arizona, Pima Association of Governments, the Southern Arizona Leadership Council, Sun Corridor, and the University of Arizona. Without our sponsors and our partners, the MAP dashboard and events like today would not be possible. We'd also like to acknowledge and mention our media sponsor, the Arizona Daily Star. We publish 2 features each month in the Arizona Daily Star. The last Sunday of each month, we publish a business section feature. This is something that's related to the economy typically. And then the first Monday of each month in the health section, we publish a health related feature. So look for those in the Star. And with that, I would like to turn things over to Robert and Laura from the University of Arizona to discuss their white paper that we recently published on the MAP dashboard. If we have time at the end, I'll pop up the MAP dashboard website, show you where you can subscribe for that newsletter, and also how you can access some of the articles that will be discussed in today's presentation. So I will stop my screen share and ask Robert and Laura to turn on their videos and start their presentation. Hi, Laura. I can see you. Can you unmute yourselves as well?
Yes. Hi.
Hello.
Perfect. I'll turn things over to you now.
Okay. It says people can see my screen, so I'm going to assume that. I know it's been a year and a half, but I'm always afraid that people can't see.
We can see it. Thank you.
Thank you. Cool. All right. So hi, everyone. I'm Laura McCann. I'm a PhD student at the University of Arizona School of Government and Public Policy. I'm presenting with Robert Hibbert, who's a PhD candidate at the U of A School of Geography, Development, and Environment. And today we're going to be discussing our recent white paper, A Profile-Based Approach to Indexing Housing Vulnerability in Tucson. It's a case study specific to manufactured housing. And just want to take a second and say we couldn't have done this really important work without the support for MAP or from MAP, so we really appreciate it and just wanted to acknowledge that. Also, this is part of a larger project led by Dr. Mark Keir in his Critical Financial Geography Research Group. So we have his email address here in case anyone has any questions. You're welcome to talk to us too, but I just wanted to acknowledge his help. It's been tremendous. So just adding that. All right. Okay, so this paper, like I said, is part of multiple investigations into what we're calling the manufactured housing gap. So we go into pretty great detail on this in a previous white paper, so I'll be brief here, but basically the idea is that there's a disjuncture between the promise of manufactured housing and its reality. So what we mean by this is that MH has the potential to fill a need for affordable housing solutions But in fact, it's done this throughout some of the most trying times in US history. So like the Dust Bowl in World War II or after World War II. But due to this enduring and underlying stigma, this form of housing is often the nexus of multiple vulnerabilities. So here's a conceptual map. For manufactured housing, we've broadly categorized these vulnerabilities here as social. So that might be like maybe isolation for seniors living in parks, or even financial, which would be barriers to home ownership or even poor consumer protections for people. And then environmental, so those might be heat-related fatalities or even being zoned for a flood risk. Oh my gosh, a flood zone. Sorry. These vulnerabilities can be experienced in isolation, or they can be experienced together. Where they intersect, that's where the manufactured housing gap is the widest. So that would be right here in the middle. And so that's where these three major sources of vulnerability can intersect, compound, and cascade. Let's see. And so our research objectives here are to really unpack what it means to be a resident in manufactured housing and the vulnerabilities that they face. So we need to understand the geography of manufactured housing. So where are people living? And then also we know that no vulnerable population is a monolith. So we need to better understand why residents might experience either different types of vulnerabilities or different combinations of vulnerabilities or proportions of vulnerabilities relative to others. So we need to understand that. And then because 2/3 of us are geographers, we also want to look at spatial patterns of vulnerability in Tucson, kind of look at those relationships there. So broadly, measuring vulnerability, usually people create indices, to capture drivers of vulnerability. So a lot of times when we're looking at not even causal, but just we're looking at driving factors for some kind of situation, we can't easily consider the influence of a specific variable because it's highly related to other similar variables. And it's really hard to just isolate one thing that's causing something. So an index helps us account for this high correlation among similar variables and really look at drivers of whatever we're looking for. So in our case, vulnerability. So there are like renowned, I guess, vulnerability indices. They actually also happen to both be called social vulnerability index, which is confusing, but useful. There is also a map neighborhood vulnerability study that came out, I think in July this year. And then we have our own bivariate map series that we did 2 years ago. That was a first crack at looking at vulnerability. But these are helpful, but there's empirical evidence that shows that most of the time, if we really want to look at a very specific subpopulation, we should really zone in on that. So for us, we want to look at manufactured housing residents. So it's slightly different and more nuanced than just housing vulnerability or resident vulnerability for anyone. So, and there are some other like analytical aspects, like if we use the mean, for example, it might shift the focus from marginal groups. Maybe we have like extreme values coming into play that obscure what we would find from that measure. Or maybe if we have equivalent weighting, we can't actually see what's important. And a lot of times certain variables are more important than others. And also something that's very common is categorical variables are often left out. So qualitative or categorical variables are hard to capture in statistical analysis. And so we need a way to actually account for that. We lose a lot of variation in our data when we do some conversions there. So it's helpful to have to find a way to account for that. So we create our own index. We use logistic PCA or principal components analysis, which allows us to pare down a large set of variables that we think are relevant to vulnerability for manufactured housing based on our literature review and interviews with residents. And then we are able to pare that down, that large data set down, into more manageable components. Or it's kind of like we're binning or categorizing certain sets of variables and the amount of each variable that's necessary for each component. So we compare our resulting components to our qualitative interview data, and we generate vulnerability profiles to better capture and demonstrate resident vulnerability. So to do all of this, we have kind of an iterative research design. So way back in 2018, which seems like forever ago, we came up with bivariate maps. And so we used those. We just came up with, we were able to isolate where clusters of manufactured housing were in Tucson and Pima County. And then we also looked at comparisons of manufactured housing and then a few different dimensions like educational attainment and income level, that kind of thing. And this gave us a really nice start for finding a sampling or a sample for us so that we could do qualitative interviews. So we used maps that we created that mapped clusters of manufactured housing and intersections with different different dimensions, like I mentioned, with levels of education attainment, everything like that. So we use those to drive where we would actually do our interviewing samples, or where, sorry, I'm confusing myself. So we use those to drive our sampling strategy for qualitative interviews. And then we actually did over 80 qualitative interviews with individuals across Pima County and Tucson. And now, what we're talking about today is we're using our quantitative analysis. So we're using census microdata. We're going to perform, or we performed logistic PCA on that. And then we corroborate what we find with our qualitative interview themes so that we can construct profiles of vulnerability for two distinct groups within the manufactured housing community here. And we create an index and we map that. And so we'll go into more detail on that now. And this is just a quick, this is from our first white paper. And this is just showing where clusters of manufactured housing are. So you can see a lot of them are in Flowing Wells in southern Tucson. And that's just to give an idea for everyone. And then one last thing for me, our qualitative data themes, I just wanted to highlight what we found in our qualitative data. The most salient themes were relationships with management, mobility and access, neighborhood, thermal conditions, and connections with others. These were all like very salient themes that we found throughout our whole sample. And these are what we compare our logistic PCA results to. So now I'm going to hand it over to Robert.
Okay, thank you, Laura. And for this logistic principal component analysis, we used a wide variety of discrete and continuous variables. So categories like, is there running water, plus continuous variables like age. And we also referenced back to the field interviews that we did. And that really helped us to identify the most salient, the most influential variables. And we used so part of the process of LPCA is to take that data and create a correlation matrix that quantifies the relationships between variables. Using those relationships, it then identifies a new set of variables that are based on the influence of the original variables on the new variable in terms of weighting, the weighting by the most influence from each variable. And we use those loadings, those weights, to create scores or new values for the new variables. Next, please. So each new variable is a combination of weighted variables, and we call the new variables components. And those components, we assign them descriptive names based on the original variables with the highest loadings or weights. And in our study, we found, we identified components that meshed with demographic profiles in manufactured housing. So two of those vulnerable profiles that we found were fixed income seniors and low income households with living in old manufactured housing, that is pre-1980, around the time that that manufactured housing began to be more regulated for quality essentials. So, and again, we corroborated these profiles with our interview findings. Next slide, please. So we used a wide variety of variables, both continuous and discrete. We have households with children, the number of people in the household, the size of the lot, whether they're in the workforce, and many other things, including ethnicity, race, and other things that the literature and our interviews indicated were important to these profiles. And we came up with these three components or profiles and found that the top two are the most aligned with the literature of vulnerability. So we focused in our study on those two profiles. Next slide, please. So the first profile or component that we identified was the fixed income seniors. And their characteristics are they're often retirees or seasonal migrants. They come here for the nice atmosphere, environment, and they have, each of these profiles have unique vulnerabilities. So the fixed income seniors will often have special or need to emphasize healthcare or mobility or susceptibility to the desert heat. This graph shows the individual variables that characterize this profile and their loadings or weights. So you can see, starting at the right-hand side, the most significant loadings came from the age 65 and up variable. And then health insurance was important, single families, non-Hispanic, and often they're not working. And of course, this is a general profile. It doesn't represent every single household, but it gets at a good subset of the data. Next slide, please. So we took our loadings and mapped them onto census block groups. And we presented this, we created this map. It's a bivariate map, which maps the relationship between the principal component, or the fixed income seniors, and the presence or density of manufactured housing in each block group. If you look at the bottom right, there's a square with different graded circle or squares. So on the x-axis, you have the presence of fixed income seniors from low to high, and on the y-axis is presence of fixed income seniors, and the x-axis is the presence of manufactured housing. So the areas where both overlap the most in a significant way is that dark brown. On the map, you can see in the upper left corner, for example, that's the Flowing Wells area of Tucson. And there's a few that are very dark brown, quite a few that are a little lighter. So those are the areas that have the most significant presence of fixed income seniors in manufactured housing. And then we also have other parts of the region, and you can see the blue that represents fixed income seniors, but not necessarily those in manufactured housing. Next slide, please. So the next component or profile that we identified was low-income households in older manufactured housing. And they had, excuse me. So the salient characteristics of this profile are that they may have specific problems from heat related to the older manufactured housing. I'm actually going to need to turn over to Laura now, actually. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm unmuting myself. Okay, so yeah, so the this is very similar to what we did before. So for the low income older MH, just once again, the older MH refers to housing that was created before national regulation for standardizing the construction of manufactured housing. So some of the salient themes we have here, as you can see, are income related, not having a vehicle, older MH. And so those are loading positively, and that means they're positively correlated with this characteristic. And I will actually show you the map. So we've also mapped this. Here again, we're showing the spatial patterns here. And so this is another bivariate map comparing this component to the concentration of manufactured housing in Tucson. And you can see the different trends here. And so the darkest, like reddish color is where it's the highest in both the presence of MH and the presence of this component. Okay. And so we also have this map. We came up with the most vulnerable areas in Tucson and Pima County. So we look at the characteristics of this, are like
Statistically significant areas,
okay,
block groups.
Yes. Do you want to pick it up now, or you?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Laura. So this map shows the bivariate statistics that identify the census block groups with our two vulnerable profiles. And the light blue shows that those areas, those census block groups are either one or the other vulnerable profile group. So it's an interesting spatial pattern indicating that they don't often live in the same census block group in a statistically significant cluster. So there's only a few that are that dark blue that indicates that they're both groups present. Thanks. Next slide. Do you want?
Sure. And then our conclusions here. So this methodology allows us to have a resident-driven research design. So it's not just this inductive research design where we're just throwing variables against the wall and hoping to see what happens, but we can actually look at what residents are telling us and make comparisons and see the patterns in the data, but also the patterns in the quantitative data, excuse me, and also the patterns in the qualitative data, like what people are actually telling us. And so just some takeaways here are that the most vulnerable profile groups that we see are the fixed income seniors group and the low income older MH households. And the most geographically widespread MH vulnerability profile in Tucson is lower income older MH. And then our vulnerability profiles never rarely spatially overlap. So they're very distinct, and it also highlights how differentiated the experience is for people. So our index allows us to show how vulnerability is experienced by completely different groups. And we can show that manufactured housing is not just a form of housing for one type of people. And of course that might be obvious, but it's really helpful to be able to visualize this and also use statistical analysis to confirm this. And also it helps us generate models for future policy interventions. So identifying these subsets, yes, will help us create specialized policy interventions that benefit target groups. And so we can't just have these blanket policies, we can actually have targeted policies from this. We did want to take a minute and acknowledge our team members, past and present, and then the MAP grant actually got us started, and then we were able to get funding from the Howry Program in Environment and Social Justice, and then RII, the Research, Innovation, and Impact Group at the U of A. And we also absolutely cannot do any of this work without our community partners from Habitat for Humanity or the city of Tucson. And again, the specific team members on this project are myself, Laura McCann, Robert Hibbard, and Dr. Mark Keir, who is the principal investigator for this project. Our team website is listed here. I think our presentations might be available later. So yes, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much, Laura and Robert, really for all the work that you guys have done on the MAP dashboard. We have 2 white papers from Dr. Keir's team that we've published over the years. I'll show you at the end here where you can find those. We'll pop up the MAP website and I'll show you where you can access both the white paper they discussed today and the previous work that they have done. But thank you for your time today, and thank you for joining us and all the work that you've done for the MAP dashboard. And now I would like to welcome Liz Morales, the Director of Housing and Community Development at the City of Tucson. Welcome, Liz. So we're excited to hear what you have to say today. And I'll turn off my video and mute myself, and you can share your PowerPoint whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much. And for this opportunity, I love the work that the MAP has done for the City of Tucson in particular. That last year we were able to get some very important information out through a neighborhood vulnerability index, which is being utilized in many important ways, our market study, and the gaps analysis. So I just want to start off by saying thank you to Dr. Hammond and all involved so that we could get that work done. Let me share my presentation here. I'm speaking on housing vulnerability here in City of Tucson, also really Pima County wide. A lot of the information I'll be sharing did come from the work that we did last year on our market study, and we are working on as a department a presentation for mayor and council, and we are going to be presenting a draft rollout of our housing affordability strategy plan for Tucson to really help address the housing needs that we're seeing here in Tucson. So I'm gonna just zip through my presentation here. I want to talk, and if I have errors, I apologize. I didn't have the time to get through and review everything. So please excuse if you see any misspellings or anything. But I want to start with what is housing in vulnerability. I think if I was to survey all of you, you would probably give me a lot of different thoughts and ideas around what would cause housing vulnerability. I just want to lay the foundation as far as from my perspective, some of the things that come to my mind. When we talk about cost burden, we'll get a little bit more into that, but those are households that pay more than 30% of their household income towards their housing cost. And again, this is not necessarily just focusing on those that might be low income. We're talking about across the board, people who may even have a great income, but their costs are so exorbitant. We have large family, those type of issues that would make them to be cost burdened. Also, those who are at risk of eviction, and often it's financial. Sometimes it's not financial. Maybe it's related to lease violations or criminal activity, or the landlord just serving them a notice of to not renew the lease. Homelessness is a pretty major vulnerability at this point. And then housing instability. It's those people who are constantly moving, constantly being displaced, aren't able to maintain their housing, having to change their children from schools often, not knowing what couch they're going to sleep on or who's going to be in the home that night. So housing instability can cause a lot of issues and vulnerability. Also, we know housing that's dilapidated, broken down air conditioners, plumbing that's not functioning, electric, or unsafe housing. Also the rising rental and home prices. I'll be sharing some data around that, but that is creating a lot of housing challenges for people right now. And then unstable employment. These are just a few indicators and contributors to housing vulnerability, and people can have one and often have a lot more than just one of these indicators. Again, laying the foundation, we know that people have various situations to their housing. Most people, we think we're all in the market, rental housing or home ownership, but we also have people that might be homeless or in shelter, and what they need is stable housing. Supportive housing is the type of housing where there might be services and a subsidy included that will help stabilize and allow people to live with a lot of supports in place. Affordable rental housing, often we think of subsidy programs like the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program or public housing, but affordable is really around, it can be a subsidy type program, or it can just be other types of housing that has other types of subsidies like the low-income housing tax credit. And as an example, the city of Tucson, we own homes and we rent those below market. And so they're not necessarily have any federal programs attached to it. Affordable home ownership really is home ownership where they're able to get down payment assistance or some other program to get households into home ownership. Naturally occurring affordable housing, Southern Arizona, we were talking as a group before this session started that there's some, Southern Arizona has historically been one of the more affordable cities and areas to live in the state of Arizona. Some of that's dwindling, but it's, where people can find a place that's within their income range, but it is not necessarily subsidized or provided by any entity. And then market again and home ownership are what is driven by the market. And so people can live at any points in this, and it's not linear. Often people can bounce around any part of this. So what's affordable? Really, it's less about, we often will assign income levels, but for me today, I just want to say really it's about what can the household afford? Can they afford their housing and still have money for other necessities, transportation, healthcare, other needs that the family has, and not have to be trying to cut any of those items in order to be able to pay for housing. I just wanted to, for this point of reference, I'm not going to stay here too long, but as we look at area median income, and where that might fall, 80% is where we start with low income. As you get to 50 and 30, those are the extremely low income. But as you can see, even for a family for 55,000, it puts them at low income, and that's definitely your households that have some type of earned income or other sources. Poverty is a big indicator. It's a major contributor to housing vulnerability. Again, just to highlight that Tucson is definitely higher than the state, even than Pima County. And we have some of the highest numbers in the state. Around 20% live under the federal poverty guidelines. I spoke about those who might be paying more than 30% of their income. As you can see here, we're looking at all income ranges, and this just demonstrates that the lower the income, the higher the rate of people being cost burdened. This is information, again, we just collected to stay updated as far as where median rents and typical home values starting in 2017 to where we're at today. We've seen an incredible increase, and these numbers are pretty staggering, and they might be staggering to those of us who have housing stability. This is even more staggering to those who are facing having to move, or their owners sold their home and now they have to find another rental. This is very concerning. And here's an example, looking at some examples of households. I just want to focus in on, even with a family with two educated earners who might bring in about $80,000 a year, they're considered above the area median income at 120%. The max rent they can afford is $2,000. The average rent is about $1,974. So they could afford it, but they're, again, you have to be well above the area median income in order to afford rent. But when it comes to buying a home, that same family of four would not be able to purchase a home within their affordability. They would have to extend and pay more than 30% in order to purchase a typical home. So the other housing vulnerability that we talk about is around homelessness. And I also want to acknowledge Ciro with the University of Arizona, who's been tracking a report from 2018 to 2020, and they just did an update recently around what we think is the best estimate for people experiencing homelessness and literally unsheltered. Where the best estimate right now is around 854. I will tell you, we, with the start of pandemic in 2020, we were very concerned about the impact of homelessness with the pandemic. We brought on a hotel program utilizing hotels, and what we found is the non-congregate setting versus a shelter that's congregate where people are all in a large space, that definitely demonstrated some positive results in getting people into permanent housing. We also found that the shelters are still challenged. They still have not been able to reach full capacity. And of course, the bigger issue is the concerns over those who are living on the streets, the impact it's having on neighborhoods, on businesses, but more importantly to those who are having to be in that condition currently. So homelessness is a pretty major focus, at least from my perspective on the city, and what can we do to address it, because there's a lot of efforts happening and yet we're still seeing a tremendous amount of need. Just to hit on a couple of those things, the mayor and council had voted for a housing first director, really with the focus on how to better collaborate and coordinate resources. So that person is on board, Brandy Champion. We're in the process of purchasing hotels. We have a process called Homeless Protocol, which is around connecting those individuals to services, but also addressing the cleanup and trying to address complaints from our public. Police department last year started up a couple years ago a homeless outreach team, and then staff are really trying to not let shelter bed go unused. So we have a new process in which we're announcing daily where those available beds are. And then we have a tremendous amount of outreach teams, and we've increased the ones at the city of Tucson, but now it's about coordination and how do we work together. I want to, around housing vulnerability, can't help but talk about the eviction moratorium that was in place for over a year. And now it was lifted, and in that process, there was a lot of funding that came out from the federal government. And how has that actually been impacting those who have the need for rental assistance? And I can share this dashboard where we've had over 26,000 requests. We've already assisted over 6,000 with over 38 million being in dollars that has already been committed and paid. It's a lot of money, and we know that there's at least 3,900 people waiting to be assigned to a caseworker. Another 861 were waiting for them to complete their application. So the need is still there. We have another round of funding from the U.S. Department of Treasury, but this has been pretty unprecedented in the field that we're in, that I'm in, around this amount of funding, but also around the amount of need. But this is just indicative of what we're seeing. I want to do a shout out to the Pima County on their work. One of the things that came out of the pandemic and knowing that the evictions were very concerning is that there was an eviction prevention collaboration was brought together by the county. And one of the results of that effort was that the county instituted an emergency eviction legal services to provide free legal counsel. Also includes navigators, which are individuals who will work hand in hand and kind of walk people through the process and connecting the tenants with resources. In a recent report, it was since the program began in August, over 1,000 contacts and more than 400 legal referrals. I just provide the number. There's also an email that I didn't put in here, but this is an excellent resource. So anyone who gets an eviction notice and they're connected to the court will have access to legal counsel. And then the county and the city opened a new prevention hub to address emergency housing needs for vulnerable individuals and families. So some more to come on this. It's very new, but there's a lot, again, trying to find out how to get people the resources they need in the most streamlined way. One of the unprecedented, again, as I had said earlier, is the amount of local, state, and federal resources that we've seen. During the pandemic, we received CARES funds and rolled out a lot of programs trying to fund a lot of things around homelessness and eviction prevention. And then the American Rescue Plan is the new funding that we're now just getting rolled in. Some of the efforts around that is a homeless prevention and also the emergency housing vouchers. We got 208 for Tucson and Pima County, and getting those individuals. The biggest challenges to all of these funding is being able to work within the rental market. We have a lot of landlords who are not wanting to work with these type of programs. So we've provided some landlord incentives, clearly just free money if you wish to work with our program. It can be up to 2.5 times the rent. And so it's significant money, but it's not even necessarily luring a ton of landlords to us, but it is helping. In addition to the American Rescue Plan, Mayor and Council has directed us to try to acquire more property for development of housing, to fund developers who do affordable housing, some gap financing. Also, I'm so glad to hear the presentation on manufactured housing. We have a substantial amount, but a lot of it is aging and in disrepair. So coming up with a repair program and trying to connect that to those who need affordable housing. And also our ARPA funding will go substantially towards workforce and economic development efforts. So I hope I provided some valuable information around what's housing vulnerability and some of the efforts that we're doing. So thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Liz. That was really fantastic information on what the city has been doing with homelessness and vulnerability, and then also with the funding for rental assistance. A really great presentation. We'll have questions at the end for Liz. At this time, I would like to ask Liz to turn off her video. We'll ask Jeremy to turn on his, and I'll welcome Jeremy, who's the managing director at Rancho Sarita, to talk about the construction trends and things that they see in the housing market. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you, Jen. Appreciate it. Really happy to be here. We heard about the manufactured housing opportunities and where that is right now. Liz gave a great overview of what the region's facing from a truly low-income, affordable housing. She also gave a great overview of the entire spectrum of housing, from truly affordable and to attainable to market rate. I'm going to focus my slides and presentation today more on the market rate side, which is a majority of housing in the region. And this will be focused on new homes. We'll highlight some resales, but really the for sale development. We'll touch on rentals, but really the for sale market as we see it. So we'll talk a little bit about our company, about what we do, why we're talking today, but really then dive into the housing market. I thought it's always helpful, not sure of the audience and from a knowledge standpoint, but helpful to take a step back, look at what goes into a house, what goes into building a neighborhood, and really what is causing these price increases, these time delays. We'll dive into a little bit more of the labor material shortages, and then focus in on some opportunities. A little bit about myself, second generation family development company here in Southern Arizona. My late father founded Sharpen Associates, and we have developed in every municipality as well as the county over the last 40 years and continue to do development throughout the communities. Our main community right now is Rancho Sarita in the town of Sarita, about 20 minutes south of Tucson. Founded in 2001, we're about 9 miles south of Tucson. We're entitled for almost 12,000 homes with 1.5 million square feet of commercial plan. We're about halfway complete. And Rancho Sarita was really founded in 2001 as how are you that market rate affordable place to live? How do we create the most highly amenitized community within Southern Arizona for that first-time home buyer? And 20 years ago, that first-time home buyer was in the low hundreds, and I'll come back to that in a moment. To date, the market's strong, but it's difficult. We have 700 lots in development. We have new neighborhoods, new amenities being built, and we have 1,500 lots in escrow. Today, we have over 18,000 residents and currently have 5 national home builders working in our community and really trying to build affordable homes. And I think it's really important to work with those home builders and recognize that the largest part of the market is that first-time home buyer. It's that young family, the 2-income young kids family, and that's what each of these home builders are trying to reach. But it's getting difficult, and we'll dive into that. So current housing market, today we have 4,000 permits through the third quarter. New construction is up 10% from September of 2020. And if you recall, September of 2020 was really when things started kicking up during COVID. Resale closings activity is up 5%, new construction pricing's up 13%, and resale pricing is up 21%, which is unbelievable if you think about where the market is, where that resale has almost hopefully was supposed to be stepping in as that first-time buyer in that affordable product, and we're not seeing that, and we'll come back to that here shortly. The current housing, these are some pricing that you're seeing in Rancho Sarita specifically. Now, remember, we started 20 years ago with houses in the low 100s as a for-sale product. today, over the last 20 years, our average resale is 321,000. And now our average new this last month was 317,000. And the month before that, it was closer to 350. So our builders are finding ways to bring that price down and try to get more homes into the hands of that first-time buyer and that in a more affordable product. So, but why is there so much demand for housing? We know it's been a good year. I moved during COVID. I know a lot of other people that moved during COVID. Why is there so much demand for housing? And, you know, I think the highest level look is that we are underbuilt since the Great Recession. Before the recession, builders had a lot of housing. They overbought, and there was a lot of land in their pipeline. And the lessons for these builders, and to some extent, they're paying the price now because they don't necessarily have those land offerings and those lots to sell to homeowners, home buyers, is that there's just not enough housing on the ground. And there hasn't been over the last decade. And that's of all housing types. That entire spectrum that Liz spoke to, we are underserved in each one of those housing types for each one of those demographics. So as well as rentals and for sale and density and not dense, you know, so that's something that we are trying to address and we're playing catch up on. You know, it's important to mention that there's a lot of debate out there right now about how undersupplied we are. The National Association of Realtors will say we're 5 to 6 million units undersupplied around the country. You know, I tend to follow John Wilson, who's a UBS economist, and he believes we're roughly under 1 million houses undersupplied around the country. So that's an interesting debate that will continue, I'm sure. But regardless, we need more housing across the board. You know, the other thing that is creating this level of demand are these generational shifts we're seeing. It's kind of this perfect storm of the baby boomers kind of moving down, so wanting smaller houses or new communities or new experiences. And so they're selling their house and they're moving. And then the millennials who are of that family forming age, which historically has been the age that people, although now it's later, it used to be in their 20s and now we're starting to see it in our 30s and 40s, but where people are forming those families and buying their first time home. Now, COVID changed how we think about housing. COVID changed everything for housing. You know, people were spending a lot of time in their house. And so that led to to home improvements. That led to the recognition, hey, me, my partner, my wife, and 2 or 3 kids, you know, we all can't fit in a 1,500 square foot house. So let's go move and let's go find something else. Hey, we need more parks and trails. You know, if I can work from anywhere, let's move down, you know, to a nice neighborhood, or let's move down by the lake and have that. So housing shifted it. The house also became more than a house. It became a home. It became where we eat, where we entertain. And so you're seeing, and it's where we work. So you're seeing a shift in how houses are designed. And finally, there's a lot of money in the marketplace. Despite the pandemic, savings and investments increased over last year across the board. And then government stimulus, while it has been tremendously helpful, as you saw Liz with the programs she put out there, it also put a lot of money into people's pockets that are now encouraging and allowing people to step into home ownership and also purchase other items and spur that economy on. And we'll step into that a little bit deeper later. So this is a slide this is kind of the mess that is my job and my team and our team's job, right? This is how we create a house, and we're on the development side. We work with great home builders. You know, I know I've had a lot of discussions with KB Homes about, hey, how do we deliver more houses at a lower price, at a high quality, and get buyers in their homes. And I think you're seeing that with not only KB, but a lot of our other builders around the region. But this is a home affordability equation. There's a cost and time component to each one of these, and that adds that increase of a home price or decrease of a home price. So you have the land, the due diligence, different costs, you have financing costs and closing costs, and then you have to go through the rezoning process, and you have planning and engineering and development costs and off-site costs, on-site subdivision improvements, and you have lot improvements, and you have the government comes in, and you have utility permits and fees and inspections and construction, and all of that. And then you have all the overhead, and then the sales commission, everything else is to get that homeowner their keys. That's a mess, right? So let's take it a step back. This is really what life was like pre-COVID. We had, you acquired the land, zoning typically and entitlements typically would take 1 to 3 years, depending on the size of the project. Rancho Sarita, we took, probably 7 years, a little longer. We helped incorporate the town of Sarita. And so we were kind of on the ground floor of that, but usually 1 to 3 years. And then you go into engineer and plating, which typically should take about 6 to 8 months, again, for a typical 100-lot subdivision or apartment complex. And at the same time, you'll be designing the houses or the vertical aspect of it. And then your horizontal construction, kind of that lot development, that neighborhood development, the roads, the sewer, the parks, and so forth, is about 9 to 12 months. And finally, the vertical, what we call vertical construction, the building of the house, the building of the house should be, prior to COVID, a national home builder could build it in 4 months. And remember this slide, we're going to come back to this. So again, if you follow news at all around real estate, around the economy, these are the words, these are the headlines that you're seeing. Supply chain bottlenecks, mortgage rates increase, and then mortgage rates are decreasing, and then mortgage rates are increasing again. Home builder sentiment bounces back, and then you'll see the next day that they didn't meet their numbers and what they expected. Zillow's now can't buy houses, and you see prices growing at record paces. And then finally, housing affordability. Will anything be affordable as we come out of this? These are the headlines that I follow that gets me thinking and our team thinking about, hey, how can we build attainable communities for our region that people and young families can live in and enjoy? So current challenges, and I'm going to focus in a little bit on labor and materials, but really this is causing the current challenges of labor shortage and material shortages are causing our home builders to limit sales activities. They're having to delay closings, increase pricing, even throughout a process, we're having to increase prices because they're getting price increases, and then take what many believe to be drastic actions to unclog production line. And that could be from committing up front to a subcontractor so they don't lose having workers on their site. That could be limiting how many homes are being sold and what homes are being sold and passing up buyers to another home builder. Things that never would have happened prior to COVID and pre-pandemic in that way. So material shortages, just some, supply chain issues that you're seeing, the hurricane impact areas, raw material shortages. We're seeing delays in cabinets, HVACs, windows, microchips, if you're trying to do anything with electronics, cars, etc. And paint and wood, steel, especially on our commercial, which we're not talking about commercial, but commercial development right now, which uses a lot of steel, is being delayed and increased dramatically. Economists seem to agree that the supply chain will normalize over time, but it's going to be evolutionary and not revolutionary. And so it's going to take patience and just kind of easing through it. And we need to, like what we're trying to do locally, the supply chain needs to build up its workforce and get those materials. And so hopefully we start seeing that in the near term and seeing some relief there. Labor shortages are something that we're dealing with. We were dealing with it pre-COVID. During the recession, we lost a generation of workers in the construction industry that never came back. And so after that, our region started putting together training programs, but COVID really hurt that ability and kind of where we were going with that. And so the training programs that we did have been limiting the ability to transition students to the labor market because they weren't able to be in person. They weren't able to finish their training. Across the country, over 3 million people dropped out of the labor force. The majority of them aren't coming back. This is from an economist from Beacon Economics, and subcontractors are having trouble finding and keeping qualified labor. And finally, immigration policy, which has been affecting our industry for decades, continues to have a lasting effect. I'm not going to talk about kind of the macro issues that we're facing, but that is one that constantly affects our ability to get workers and people on our jobs. So wanted to come back to this slide, and I think it's really important for all of us to understand that the delay is across the board. And we aren't able to operate in silos. And to really look at it like this, zoning entitlements are a little longer, but probably within that time frame. Plating and engineering is now 8 to 12 months. Design is probably similar what it was, but horizontal construction, that neighborhood development, is now 12 to 15 months. So it's at a 3 to 4 month delay. Vertical construction is now 6 to 8 months, almost double the amount of time. And so all in all, you're seeing up to almost a year of delays. And as a home builder, as a developer, we're taking a lot of risks, even if you're doing affordable housing, but regardless, we're taking a lot of risk in trying to project what the market is 2 years from now, or even 3 years from now. You know, I'm in deals with home builders right now. We're in deals with home builders that they won't be selling a home to a new buyer until 2023. And we've been in this deal a while. So it's a 2-year relationship trying to get homes on the ground. And the reason I bring this up, and it kind of leads us into the next slide, is that we need to understand that we're not able to work in silos anymore. That an engineer may say, hey, I'm only a month, or in a town planner may say, hey, I'm only, by us working together, we're only 2 months delayed. Well, when you compare that with then your neighborhood construction and your vertical construction, now you're 6 to 8 months delayed, all adding to an increase in the price of the home. And so if our focus is how do we make housing more affordable across all demographics, across all income brackets, this is something that we collectively can work on and recognize that the way to do it locally is through partnership, collaboration, and communication. And I'm going to leave the higher level macroeconomics to Dr. Hammond and others to talk about interest rates, to talk about inflation and what's going to happen with that. I have thoughts, but what I am focused on is, as I think about what are some solutions that we can do in the private and public sector to meet the demand for housing, both. And really it's how do we create more flexible zoning to enable various residential options. And that may mean that you have a higher density. That may mean we need to be a little bit more flexible on street standards, on walkability. How do we create more creative platting in neighborhoods that maybe we haven't seen in our region? How do we streamline entitlements? We in some municipalities that you're able to get conditional approval to start development. In some others, you're not. In some municipalities, you can't start building a house until there's pavement on the road. And others, you can start building a house once there's dry utilities in and you can hook up to sewer. Well, that saves you 4 months. So if you talk about housing affordability and kind of trying to lessen that time and lessen that cost, those 4 months really matter. And so how do we work together to streamline entitlements? And the way to do that is better communication between all parties involved. The public sector, and when I say public sector, it's your municipalities, it's on the planning and the planning departments, it's the community development departments, it's the private sector, it's the developers, it's the industry groups. How do we come together and think of ideas, say, hey, recognizing what affordable housing is and making things more affordable? It's not just subsidies and so forth. We can take actions today and to meet the market demand and take some risk off the table, meet the market demand and get new buyers in houses or new renters in apartments or rental housing. Also, technology is pretty incredible. Cities across the country are utilizing technology to address staffing challenges. And that's something that I think this region can really look at and then help communicate that out and see what can we do to help internally as well. And finally, it's, as far as that goes, is managing expectations, coming together early on saying, hey, this is what we hope to do. How can we work together to get that done? I recognize your needs. I recognize our needs. How can we merge those together and work together to get that done? Finally, talking about labor, we really need to focus in on JTED. It's a great program with Pima County and the Pima Community Colleges. Look at trade schools, encourage people to enter our field, whether it's a marketing campaign, talk about that somebody at 18 years old can graduate a JTED program, go drive a heavy equipment, and make six figures and have a very solid career moving forward. So a tremendous opportunity there. And then lastly, we need to be able to work fast and diligent in identifying real-time needs and work together to solve those, to solve that. And so finally, the big takeaway for me in listening to the other presentations, as well as thinking about this, is as a private developer, we work on the market. And so we take a lot of risks to try to time when that market is and deliver a product that the market will bear. Yet there's a huge need out there. And that need will maintain as we continue growing in this region, which we're projected to do. We're going to continue to need housing. And the best way to do it is working together from a development side with the home builder aspect and the public sector, and come together to say, hey, how do we solve these problems, these micro problems? Can't solve the macro, but how do we address some of these micro problems to make it a little bit easier and hopefully bring down and make it a little bit more affordable. So with that, I will turn it over, and I look forward to the questions. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jeremy. That was a really interesting presentation on the timeline and process that your development goes through to get houses built and available to our community, and then the challenges you faced during COVID that made it more difficult, the continued pandemic that we're in. So I think we'll now turn it over to questions, and we'll start with you, Jeremy, but I'll ask Liz and Laura and Robert to turn on their videos. We had a great question just come in for you, Jeremy, I think that we can start off with here. And it says, thanks for the great presentation. The Rancho Serrita Master Plan is one of the largest and most successful master plans in the entire state. New buyers as well as resale buyers seek out opportunities to live there. Can you tell us how many renters versus owner-occupied individuals reside in your community? And have you seen the demand for rentals with increased employment growth in Serrita, Border Patrol, and around the TIA?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's really interesting. We are historically in master plans like Rancho Serrita, rentals of traditional single family houses like you'll see and I will say Robert's a resident, so I appreciate you being a resident, Robert. But historically it's about 20%. Our rentals, our rental market went down about 15% of our overall community. And so there's a huge need there in the rental aspect. And we're actually doing a couple projects to try to address that. But what our demographic is really that Border Patrol, Air Force, Raytheon employee, a lot of that workforce kind of defense oriented employment. And we are seeing a huge demand in our research. There's a huge demand from a market rate rental standpoint within our region, as well as I would say the Southeast side, to serve that demographic. And because that's really a huge part of and I think Dr. Hammond has mentioned this through many of his presentations, that sector is such a large part of our employment sector. So, as we look at it, renters is a part of where homeownership was really the main focus for a lot of master plan communities. You're seeing across the board rental communities being targeted and planned within large master plans. Rocking K has one coming in. We've looked in different areas as well. And I think you'll see that more, a better integration of different housing types within master plan communities.
Thank you, Jeremy. I have a question for Laura and Robert. And there's somebody asking if there's any traditional developers that you know of, or maybe Jeremy or Liz as well, to plan to include manufactured housing in an effort to increasing housing availability and affordability. But Laura or Robert, are you aware of any traditional developers that are incorporating manufactured housing?
I personally am not. So that's kind of a challenge, I think, for developers and cities, is to figure out a way, figure out the best way to be able to integrate at least a little bit some of those housing types. That's one thing I really like about Rancho, is you've got all kinds of different sizes of houses. You've got starter homes and a larger, I guess, a higher price point homes, but they're all real close together. And So I bet that was an interesting process in this making this master plan community work. Yeah.
We're seeing there's a number of developers throughout the state. They're not yet here in Tucson. They've tried and they've been looking in Southern Arizona that they call it attainable housing. You know, these are housing under, ironically, these are housing, this is houses under 200,000, right? And to think of a manufactured house under 200,000, that's their type of, this is the type of the community. And so I think they're trying, they put a number of offers on, they haven't had the best reception from residents and municipalities. I think there is an older view of what manufactured housing communities look like. And some of the developers out there around the country that are building new ones, that's not what they're building. And so I think it's an education that to bring them in, and also the prefab, there's as prefab housing and, you know, continues to grow and becomes more sustainable, and you know, that's going to be incorporated into, I think, vertical builders and builders that you see locally.
Jeremy, Liz, do you have anything to add on that, or?
Yeah, I would just say I'm not aware of any new development. I will say a lot of the existing manufactured housing parks tend to be highly sought after by investors because they tend to be very good for cash flow. And so it is not off, it's what's existing. I think it's likely you won't see any new developments that will be solely manufactured housing type parks. I think that's it will be hard to find, but I will say in general, what we have existing is really where people who want to be in this work is to buy existing parks and try to have good tenants there.
Thanks, Liz. I have another question for you, and a more general question is, what ideas or best practices could be implemented by local governments in the Tucson region to help improve affordability in our communities?
So this is a question I would love some really easy answers to. Unfortunately, none of them are easy. We also live in a state where if we try to follow best practices in other states, they would not work here because our state legislature has some preemption things in place, for instance, around inclusionary zoning and those type of efforts that tend to work in other communities. So, but what we know, my colleagues over in planning and development services have been really working great on implementing some new ideas around the accessory dwelling unit ordinance that was just recently passed. Also around overlays where we could provide some incentives to developers to develop affordable housing. So these are some of the things we're currently trying to work on. And also, again, I think for us, what we have is federal resources where we can help with down payment assistance and how to get that and how to help people get to a place where they financially and with their credit be in a good position to buy, and just filling that gap between what they can afford versus what's the market. So those are some of the things we can do and are currently working towards, but there's, we'll continue to look for the best tools that we can do.
Great, thanks. And Robert and Laura, kind of a follow-up or similar question to what we're discussing here is, how can you further integrate manufactured housing into neighborhoods with other housing types in a way that residents would approve of? Robert? Oh yeah, you're muted, sorry.
I think kind of like what has been said before, there's just this stigma against manufactured housing. I think a lot of integrating it would have to do with giving people new information, basically, on manufactured housing. A lot of times, I've been on this project for a couple of years, and so whenever somebody's like, "Oh, what kind of research do you do?" and I start to explain it, and I explain the the full, I guess, spectrum of manufactured housing, people are always surprised because people have a certain just assumption, I guess, based on like pop culture and just also what we're used to. So I think we would need some kind of information campaign. And also, I think we've done interviews with lots of residents in manufactured housing, but I think doing like maybe a combined focus group would be an interesting way to start having those conversations with more than just residents in manufactured housing, really getting input from everyone.
Thank you, Laura.
And if I may, I have a comment. I recently did a look at what kind of housing types are most prevalent across the country, and you know, the single family large lot house is the overwhelmingly dominant housing type, and a lot of communities struggle to even bring in what a lot of planners call the missing middle, with condos and townhomes and apartment buildings, even small ones, especially small ones. You've got really large apartment complexes, and then the dominant single family large lot house. And the missing middle could be brought in, including manufactured housing, I think, with some zoning and design innovations, but the financial aspect is difficult too, just like Mr. Sharp was mentioning. So we need to put a lot of brain power behind trying to come up with some solutions.
You know, and Jerry mentioned in the chat about about the financing for manufactured housing. And our first, I didn't mention this, our first neighborhood within Rancho Cerrito was a manufactured housing community, Rancho Resort, 55 plus. And we had to transition to a single family neighborhood or tradition, or not single family, but traditional stick built, because at that time, there weren't a lot of financing options. Now there's a lot more, especially if you go through specific developers. Getting it on your own is much difficult, but if you buy it through a development or community, it's a lot easier. But it was very difficult 20 years ago, and we've looked at it since, and you know, it's a little bit easier, but still challenging. You need to be a large manufactured home developer to have those options, is what it looks like.
Yes, I was responding to the chat. That's a huge issue. Getting loans is really hard to do. And I think that is like a national effort. I think there are current efforts right now to have government sponsored enterprises try to create a secondary market so that it's not so dominated by just a few players, but I'm not sure how well that's going. So I think that plan started in 2019. So I haven't seen a ton of data on those. And I haven't seen if there are more loans being offered by other places. But I think that would really have to be a huge part of making homes more accessible.
Robert, I think your point that missing middle is a great segue into a question for Jeremy, and that is, would your development consider offering more multifamily sites so there was more affordable options there?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have always had planned a number of multifamily sites in our community, and we still do. We're looking at one right now. What we're finding in the marketplace is that what the market demands for a very similar price is different types of what they call, you know, single family rentals at a higher density. So where, you know, in the neighborhood Robert lives in, there might be 4 houses to an acre, let's say. But for these single family rentals or built for rent products that are single family and non-attached, or maybe a duplexes, you might get 8, 10, or 12 to the acre. So you get a higher density, you're creating a different type of community, but rather than going vertical, like some of the apartments that you see around Pima County, you're creating a different type of community, single family. So we're looking at that. We're actually designing a couple right now. And then in addition to that, we have more traditional multifamily sites available. Multifamily typically follows in a community like Rancho Cerrito, where we were really from the ground up, and there wasn't a large city or large density around us. It has to follow multifamily and rentals really follow the the kind of single family market. And so we're at that place now within our plan, within our development, that we're able to do that.
Great. And one more question here for you, Jeremy, is what do you think what we're experiencing in the market today is going to have lasting effects moving forward post-pandemic?
Thank you, Jen. That's a good question. I am not the crystal ball. I'm not an economist. I don't know, but we have 150 employees, and so we take kind of look to the future and say, hey, how do we continue doing what we're doing? I believe in homeownership. I believe in housing. I believe there are a lot of different types of housing. And I am grateful that our industry is now looking into that. Our home builders are around the country are now saying, hey, we don't need to build the traditional house. We can build a Z lot and get 10 to the acre, and there's a demand for that, and residents and buyers are looking for that. So I think there will be lasting effects. I hope that the various economists and various experts are right that the supply chain balances out. I think that we need to bring down costs of it. There is inflation, and whether that's transitionary or if it's lasting, I'm going to leave that for Dr. Hammond. But ultimately, there are, I think the demand for housing is lasting, and some of the changes that you saw through COVID is lasting. And as far as how people are working from home, and even if they're not working from home, what they need in a house and how that looks. And so you're seeing a shift in how houses are designed. My hope is, I'm a part of the Housing Alliance, which is really about innovation in housing. My hope is that, especially on the national home builder side, from a scalability standpoint, we're able to bring in more prefab and more sustainable options to address the labor and supply issues. But so there's a lot to unpack there, but ultimately, I'm confident in housing. I'm confident in the market. I'm confident in this region from a housing. We have land all throughout Southern Arizona. I'm confident in this region on where housing will be.
Thank you, Jeremy. And then I'd like to ask you, Liz, kind of as an ending question here is, you talked a lot about the assistance that the city of Tucson offers, and can you let us know, just so that we can share with others, where should people go who have never asked for assistance? Like, what's the best way for people to find the type of assistance programs that are available? And Liz, you're muted, so can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I'm sorry. So, I think that is one of our greatest challenges, is how to get people connected. The housing arena is definitely very siloed. So with homelessness, it's our nonprofit, our social nets, right, that provide those social services. Our Tucson Pima Collaboration and Homelessness, TPCH is what we refer to, that is kind of the connector of all those resources around homelessness. From a housing authority perspective, if someone comes to our door, we're going to do our best. Unfortunately, our answer is always our wait lists are closed. So we're not even always a great resource, but I will say that one of the things we're funding and hope to see a proposal from our community providers is to try to develop a housing resource kind of connection. Pima County has a housing resource center. There's a lot of individual ones, but really still working towards a regional type place where people can get that information. So I think we need to work towards that. But I will say that, right now we're working on a no wrong door approach around housing and homelessness. So just always trying to reach out. I'm a resource to anyone in this group, and hopefully everyone, I'll put my email in there, but I get emails every day from people looking for housing resources. So that's something that I see as a great need, and how do we make sure people have the help. The one thing I did want to mention is around the rental assistance. It's for eviction prevention, but it's not even just for those who are at risk of being evicted. It could be for people who don't have income but need help with rent going forward for the next 3 months. Those programs that we have through the U.S. Department of Treasury is available to those. And that's through the Community Investment Corporation, and Pima County has the Community Action Agency. But the best way, that dashboard I shared came from the website Tucson Pima EP for eviction prevention housing.com. And that is a way where people can get that financial assistance. The last source I would say is housing counseling agencies. We have several that are HUD certified housing counseling that can help people get loan ready to purchase homes. And so those housing counseling agencies are very valuable and helpful and walk people to the point where they can be prepared to get a loan. So those are some of the resources I'd like to share. But again, I'll put my email address if anyone has questions around that.
Perfect. And we will share the slides that you make available to us on the MAP dashboard. And if you could also share those links, we can provide those on the MAP dashboard with a link to the MAP talk and to everyone's slides, and then those links to those resources. I would like to thank all of you so much for joining us today. It was really great presentations from all of you. I'm looking at different aspects of Tucson's housing and vulnerability and how we're getting new homes on the ground in Rancho Cerrito. It was really great to hear from all of you, the white papers. I'm going to share my screen now real quickly here just to show you everyone where some of those resources that were mentioned are available. We have here the MAP dashboard is recently updated. So if you haven't been here in a while, we do have a new website. But below here, you'll see we have this Tucson housing market study that Liz mentioned. You can click here and see all of some of the things that she talked about today and the vulnerability for the city of Tucson. This is the white paper that both Laura and Robert talked about today. You can find that article here. If you want to sign up for our newsletter, you can scroll down to the bottom of the website here and subscribe. This is a great way to stay up to date on our MAP talks, any new data articles that we have coming out. And then we also have that other white paper that was mentioned that Dr. Kier and his team worked on, and you can find that here in the library section of the MAP dashboard. And we have a link that will go directly to the MAP white papers. You can find that most recent one, the case study on manufactured housing, as well as the previous one they worked on here, the manufactured housing gap. And so lots of other resources available on the MAP. Liz had mentioned housing cost burden. You can find housing cost burden information here in health and social well-being under housing cost burden. We look at Tucson relative to other metropolitan areas. And as she mentioned earlier, you can look, we do have housing cost burdens for even those earning over 75,000 or more. So you can see in Tucson that 3.7% of those households earning over 75,000 or more are considered housing cost burden, meaning they're paying more than 30% of their income in their mortgage or their rent. And you can look at how that differs for owners versus renters. It's substantially higher for renters compared to homeowners. And that holds across the state and the nation as well. And then we have that housing affordability information here available under the economy. And you can see that Tucson is currently the most affordable region. Looking at the annual data from 2020, we have an upcoming article that will be looking at the quarterly data that was just released today for the third quarter. Housing affordability is declining across the nation in Tucson and Phoenix. And so we'll be addressing that in an upcoming article on the MAP dashboard in the next couple of weeks. So I invite all of you to go and look at those resources, and thank you again all so much for joining us today. It was really a really wonderful presentations. And so with that, I will end the webinar, and I'll share the link with everybody late morning tomorrow. So bye-bye.
Thank you.